The Helix Concord Academy didn't feel like a school. It felt like a verdict carved into metal. Its lecture halls were carved from the inner ribs of Caro's ring, an orbital megastructure so old the Concorde claimed it had outgrown history. Every surface was engineered to remind you that civilization was a solved problem here. Clean lines, muted lights, air that tasted like nothing, and silence that came pre-installed in the walls. Elias Mercer sat 3 rows from the back, shoulders square, hands folded, eyes forward. The amphitheater curved around a floating holodais where Professor Sorenkel hovered in a robe of shifting fabric, half cloth, half projected fractal. The professor's species had no fixed coloration. Their skin refracted like a thin film. It made their expressions hard to read, which in this place counted as a virtue. On the far wall, the lecture title was written in Concorde Standard. Warfare Ethics, Simulation Access Restrictions and Species-Based Limits. Below it, a smaller line sat like a footnote no one wanted. Human participation. Prohibited. Elias had learned to ignore the stares. Not because they hurt, he'd had worse than stares, but because staring was the Concorde's favorite way of speaking without risking anything. Professor Sorenkel's voice rolled across the hall, precise and calm. Restrictions exist for reasons of stability. The Concorde does not ban frivolously. When a species displays documented harm responses to certain archives, our responsibility is prevention. A dozen alien students nodded, or flashed bioluminescent agreement, or pulsed their throat membranes in a ritual that meant the same thing. We are civilized because we avoid the ugly parts. Veelrix Thuan sat in the front arc, centered like he owned the room. His Aurelian frame was slender, almost delicate, wrapped in an immaculate uniform that looked more ceremonial than practical. The Aurelians were known for 2 things: telepathic sensitivity and a belief that sensitivity equaled superiority. Veelrix lifted a hand. The professor paused instantly. That was Veelrix's kind of privilege. With respect, Professor, Veelrix said, voice silky as polished glass, the human restriction is not prevention. It is indulgence. A low ripple moved through the hall. Not laughter yet. Anticipation. Professor Sorenkel folded their hands. Explain. Veelrix stood. When he moved, he did it like a performance. We claim the ban prevents psychological destabilization. Yet we allow the human to attend this institution at all. His luminous eyes flicked briefly toward Elias, as if Elias were a data point, not a person. So what is it truly? Someone behind Elias clicked their mandibles, an amused sound. Veelrix continued. The simplest answer is also the most honest. The ban exists to protect humans from humiliation. The laughter landed. It wasn't cruel in the way a knife was cruel. It was worse, effortless. Like gravity. Elias felt it roll over him and pass on. He didn't flinch, didn't tighten his jaw, didn't blink faster. The Concorde loved reactions. He refused to give them one. Veelrix spread his hands, inviting the room into his certainty. The human species is young. Emotionally volatile. Physically aggressive. Their historical record, what little we are permitted to view, reads like an endless loop of self-inflicted catastrophe. Veelrix, Professor Sorenkel warned, tone mild. I'm not insulting, Veelrix said smoothly. I'm describing. We study war as a mathematical boundary problem. Humans treated war like a culture. More laughter, sharper now. Elias inhaled through his nose. Slow. Quiet. The air tasted clean and empty. Earth air had never tasted like that. Professor Sorenkel projected a diagram. Concentric rings labeled exposure, simulation, archival access. The restrictions exist because certain species exhibit neural overload. Telepathic echo. Trauma recursion. Veelrix tilted his head, mock thoughtful. And the humans? Are we claiming they are so fragile they cannot handle a simulation? The professor paused just long enough for the silence to sharpen. Elias stared at the hologram and saw, not rings, but fences. He'd been hearing fences since he arrived. Polite fences, scientific fences, ethical fences. Always built around the same unspoken claim. Humans can't be trusted with what humans are. He didn't stand because he was angry. Anger would have been easy. He stood because he was tired of being reduced to rumor. The chair's material didn't creak, it was too well made for that. His motion still drew attention like a flare. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It softened, as if the room suddenly remembered it had lungs. Professor Sorenkel's gaze fixed on him. Cadet Mercer. Vielrix smiled with theatrical patience, as if offering Elias a chance to embarrass himself properly. Elias kept his voice level. Professor, may I ask a procedural question? Ahead. The restrictions are on simulations and archived violence modules, Elias said. Are primary source historical recordings considered modules? A murmur went around the hall, confusion, then interest. Vielrix's smile wavered, only slightly. Professor Sorenkel angled their head. You mean, uncurated footage? Yes, Elias said. Raw documentation. Not a simulation. Not a gamified scenario. Just, what happened? Vielrix let out a soft laugh, too controlled to be genuine. Human fascination with barbarism. Predictable. Elias looked at him for the first time directly. Vielrix's eyes were bright. His posture was relaxed. He'd never had to imagine his own city on fire. I'm not fascinated, Elias said. I'm proposing a standard. Vielrix's brow ridge lifted. A standard for what? For ridicule, Elias replied. The room snapped quieter. A few students shifted in their seats. Professor Sorenkel's robe flickered, colors tightening like a system recalibrating. Explain, the professor said again, but now the word carried weight. Elias kept his hands visible, palms relaxed. He'd learned that people, alien or not, trusted you more when you looked unarmed. There's a belief here that the ban is to protect humans. If that's true, then any evidence will support it. If it's not true, then the ridicule is built on ignorance. Vielrix's voice sharpened. You want us to watch your species kill each other? Elias didn't answer that. He didn't let the framing stand. I want the class to see why the restriction exists. Not as rumor. Not as a line on a policy wall. As context. Professor Sorenkel drifted slightly closer, levitating down the dais as if gravity had become negotiable. Cadet Mercer, the Concorde's archives include material classified beyond student clearance. I'm not asking for classified, Elias said. I'm asking to submit footage from open human records. Verified. Dated. Corroborated. Material our own public can access. Vielrix's eyes narrowed. Public. Humans make their violence public. Elias almost smiled, but it didn't reach his face. We make our scars public, he corrected. There's a difference. Aurelian telepaths in the front rows exchanged flickers of thought. Elias could see it in the subtle tensing around their temples, the tiny involuntary flinches as if words had edges. Professor Sorenkel turned the holodiagram off. The wall went blank except for the one line that mattered. Human participation. Prohibited. Policy exists to prevent harm, the professor said. Not to validate social disputes. This isn't social, Elias said quietly. It's academic. We're in a class about ethics. The core evidence is being treated like a contamination risk. Meanwhile, the conclusion is being used as entertainment. A pause. Deep. Measuring. Vielrix leaned forward, voice honeyed again. Let him submit it. If it's so enlightening, we'll all be grateful. And if it's what I expect, he shrugged lightly, then the ban will finally make sense to him. Elias didn't look away. It already makes sense, he said. That's the problem. It makes sense to me. It doesn't to you. Professor Sorenkel's gaze swept the hall, reading a room that believed it was immune to being read. There is a procedural avenue, they said at last. A limited ethics review session. Faculty supervised. No neural link amplification. No empathic overlays. Vielrix smiled wider, triumphant. Elias felt nothing like victory. Only the steady click of inevitability. I will submit, he said. Professor Sorenkel's hand made a small gesture in the air. Somewhere beneath the academy, in sealed data vaults and policy engines, systems woke. Silent authorizations. Quiet alarms. Ancient warnings dusted off and reapplied. Veelrix sat back down, satisfied, and the class began to breathe again, as if this had been a spectacle, not a door opening. Elias lowered himself into his seat with the same controlled motion. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. But in the back of his mind, he saw the footage lined up like ghosts in a corridor. And he wondered, briefly, honestly, whether the Concord had ever banned humans to protect humans at all. The bell tone chimed softly through the hall. Professor Sorenkel's voice was careful now. Cadet Mercer. Provide your material by the next cycle. Elias nodded once. Outside the windowless chamber, Caro's ring rotated in perfect silence. And somewhere deep in the Concord sealed archives, a red warning icon began to blink. Elias Mercer had 8 hours before the ethics review session. That was how long the Concord system allowed a cadet to assemble a submission once provisional approval was granted. 8 hours to decide what a room full of alien scholars would see when they finally looked at humanity without filters. His assigned archive chamber was small, windowless, and insulated against empathic bleed. The walls were a neutral grey, deliberately uninteresting. A single console hovered at chest height, its interface already unlocked, waiting. The Concord trusted process more than people. Elias stood there for a long moment without touching anything. He wasn't afraid of the footage. He had grown up with fragments of it, history compressed into documentaries, anniversaries, textbooks that tried to make horror legible. What weighed on him was choice. Not what humans had done, but which moments best explained why they kept going afterward. He activated the console. Thousands of files bloomed into existence, arranged by date, region, classification. The Concord systems flagged several automatically. High casualty density, extreme environmental failure, civilian mortality event. Elias ignored them at first. Shock alone proved nothing. He filtered for something else. Response time, immediate. Outcome, incomplete. Survivability, statistically negligible. The first clip he selected wasn't a battle. It was a flood. A city half submerged, buildings like broken teeth above black water. The footage was shaky, recorded on a handheld device. Sirens wailed, overlapping into noise. People moved through chest-high currents carrying strangers, not supplies. A man slipped and vanished beneath the surface. Someone else took his place without comment. Elias tagged it context and set it aside. The second clip was older. Grainier. Soldiers in mismatched gear holding a line that no longer existed on any map. Smoke, snow, exhaustion etched into every movement. There was no music, no narration. Just breathing and the sound of distant impact. A voice crackled over the recording. "We're not getting out." Another voice replied, calm to the point of gentleness. "Then we hold." Elias closed his eyes for half a second, then saved the clip. By the time the session bell chimed, he had assembled exactly 7 files. No gore. No dramatization. Just endurance under conditions the Concord defined as irrational. The ethics review chamber was smaller than the lecture hall, designed to discourage theatrics. Tiered seating still curved around a central projection field, but closer, tighter. Faculty occupied the rear arc, students filled the front rows, quieter than before. Veelrix Thuan sat with deliberate ease, arms folded, expression composed. Confidence radiated from him, untested and intact. Professor Sorenkel hovered beside the projection field. "This session is observational only," they announced. "No commentary during playback. Any participant experiencing distress may exit." A pause. "Cadet Mercer," the professor said. "Begin." Elias stepped forward. He didn't look at Veelrix. He didn't look at the students. He focused on the console and activated the first file. The flood filled the chamber. Water surged through streets lit by failing emergency lights. The footage jolted as the camera operator ran, slipped, steadied. A woman clung to a traffic pole, shouting for someone she couldn't see. 2 figures waded toward her without hesitation, bracing against the current. No one spoke in the room. Telepathic species reacted first, not with screams, but with subtle physiological tells. Shoulders tensed. Fingers curled. A faint shimmer passed through the Aurelians as their empathic fields strained against unshielded human panic. The clip ended with a static shot. People huddled on a rooftop, soaked, shaking, alive. Veelrix frowned. "That's disaster response," he said before he could stop himself. Professor Sorinkel's gaze snapped toward him. "Silence." Elias activated the second file. The soldiers appeared. Faces hollowed by cold and hunger. They crouched behind rubble that barely qualified as cover. Artillery thundered somewhere beyond the frame, distant but constant. One soldier laughed, not loudly, not happily, but because the alternative was worse. A student near the front shifted, antennae flattening. "Why are they still there?" someone whispered before catching themselves. No answer came. The voice over the radio played again. "We're not getting out." When the clip ended, the chamber felt smaller. Veelrix's confidence had dimmed, just slightly. "They could have retreated," he said. "Quieter now." "They were the retreat," Elias replied, not looking back. The third clip was shorter. A hospital corridor after a bombing. Lights flickered. Medical staff moved with brutal efficiency, stepping around debris without pausing to mourn it. A doctor tore off a blood-soaked glove and kept working with bare hands. A Concord student stood abruptly and left, breath hitching. Professor Sorinkel made no comment. By the fourth clip, the room's atmosphere had changed. The laughter from the previous cycle felt like a rumor from another lifetime. This footage showed firefighters advancing into a structure already declared unsalvageable. The camera lingered on their faces as they crossed the threshold. One adjusted another's mask. A small, human gesture. Then flame swallowed the frame. The Aurelians recoiled as one, empathic resonance spiking into visible discomfort. Veelrix pressed his lips together, color draining from his cheeks. "End it," he said sharply. "This proves nothing but recklessness." Elias paused the projection. "This proves prioritization," he said evenly. "Different calculus. Same intelligence." Professor Sorinkel studied him. "Continue." The final clip played. It was quiet. No chaos. No crisis. Just a group of civilians rebuilding a bridge by hand. Their clothes were worn. Their tools improvised. The river below still ran high and dangerous. A child handed a plank to an adult. The adult nodded, solemn, accepting responsibility without ceremony. The clip ended. Silence held the chamber. Veelrix spoke at last, voice stripped of performance. "You showed us suffering." "No," Elias said. "I showed you continuity." Professor Sorinkel turned slowly, addressing the room. "Cadet Mercer, explain the relevance." Elias faced them. "The ban exists because humans don't disengage when logic says they should. We don't stop when outcomes turn negative. We adapt, endure, and continue." He gestured toward the darkened projection field. "Simulations reduce war to variables. Our history doesn't. It shows what happens when survival becomes a moral decision, not a tactical one." Veelrix swallowed. "You're saying you're dangerous." Elias met his gaze for the first time since the lecture hall. "I'm saying we're honest." The professor's voice was softer now. "And this honesty destabilizes others." "Yes," Elias said. "Because you feel it. And we learned to live with it." No one laughed. When the session ended, students filed out slowly, eyes unfocused, conversations muted. Veelrix remained seated, staring at the empty projection field as if something might start moving again. As Elias turned to leave, Professor Sorinkel called after him. "Cadet Mercer." He stopped. "The review will continue," the professor said. "The material requires further consideration." Elias nodded once and stepped into the corridor. Behind him, in the quiet chamber, the Concord's ethical framework creaked, just slightly, under a weight it had never fully measured. The second ethics session drew a larger audience. Officially, attendance was restricted. Unofficially, The Concorde had never been good at containing curiosity once it sharpened into unease. By the time Elias entered the chamber, additional faculty occupied the rear arc, their presence unannounced but unmistakable. A few students stood along the walls, pretending the overflow was accidental. Veelrix Thuan was already seated. He did not look composed. His posture was rigid, hands folded too tightly, eyes fixed on the projection field as if bracing for impact. The confident theatricality was gone. What remained was something brittle. Professor Sorenkel initiated the session without preamble. Cadet Mercer has been asked to provide additional context. This material has not been altered or moderated. Once playback begins, it will not be paused. A murmur rippled through the room. Elias felt it like pressure against the skin. He had chosen 3 files this time. None of them showed victory. The first clip opened on darkness pierced by distant flashes. A city skyline burned under a night sky streaked with fire. The camera trembled as explosions rolled through the streets below. Somewhere close, glass shattered. The recording was taken from ground level, from someone running. A voice panted into the microphone. "They're still coming." No species identifier appeared. No labels. Just humans moving through ruin. The footage followed a group of civilians sheltering in a subway station converted into an emergency triage. Supplies were low. Power flickered. A woman pressed her hands against a man's wound, blood soaking through improvised bandages. A child sat beside her, silent, holding a flashlight steady with shaking fingers. An Aurelian student gasped, empathic receptors flaring uncontrollably. "Why is the child still there?" "Because there was nowhere else," Elias said, voice barely audible beneath the sound of distant bombardment. The clip ended not with rescue, but with the lights going out. Someone stood abruptly and left. This time, no one pretended not to notice. The second file loaded. A frozen landscape stretched across the chamber, white and endless. Wind screamed through exposed terrain, reducing visibility to meters. Figures moved against it. Humans in heavy gear, bodies bent forward, each step an argument with gravity. "This mission was declared unsustainable," Professor Sorenkel said quietly, reading from the metadata. The clip continued anyway. A human stumbled and fell. Another stopped, turned back, and hauled them up despite the obvious cost. The group slowed. Their progress toward the objective, barely visible through the storm, became almost non-existent. Veelrix leaned forward, hands clenched. "They're compromising the entire operation." "Yes," Elias replied. They knew. On the recording, a voice crackled through a frost-coated radio. "We leave no one." The Aurelians reacted violently this time. Telepathic resonance surged, feedback spiraling as emotional density overloaded their perception. One collapsed into their seat, clutching their temples, breath coming in shallow bursts. Professor Sorenkel raised a hand, projecting a stabilizing field. "Medical assistance," they ordered calmly. The clip did not stop. The humans reached the structure at last, a research outpost half buried in ice. The objective marker blinked green, then failed. Power was gone. Data unrecoverable. The mission, by Concorde metrics, was a failure. The humans did not celebrate. They did not curse. They turned around and started the long walk back, carrying their injured with them. When the projection went dark, the silence was no longer academic. Veelrix's voice cracked when he spoke. "This isn't strategy. This is compulsion." Elias turned toward him fully. "It's responsibility." The third file began without warning. This one was older than the others. The resolution was lower. The sound imperfect. It showed a small settlement under siege, structures crude, defenses failing. The attackers were unseen, but the impact was undeniable. Explosions rocked the frame. Sirens wailed until they were cut off. Inside one structure, a group of humans gathered around a console transmitting evacuation data. The routes were compromised. The odds were clear. A man looked up from the screen. "We can't move everyone." A woman replied, steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Then we buy time." They sealed the doors. The camera followed them to a barricade overlooking the only remaining approach. Weapons were scarce. Ammunition counted in handfuls. They took positions anyway. Veelrix stood without realizing it. "Stop," he said hoarsely. "There's no outcome here." "That's correct," Elias said. The humans fired. Not wildly. Not desperately. With intent. Each shot deliberate, each movement conserving strength. The attackers never appeared fully on screen. It didn't matter. The last transmission cut off mid-sentence. The projection faded. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Veelrix laughed. It was a broken sound, sharp and disbelieving. "This is insanity," he said. "No rational species behaves this way." Elias nodded. "We know." Professor Sorenkel drifted closer to the center of the chamber. "Cadet Mercer. Clarify." Elias took a breath. He felt the weight of every eye, every empathic sense probing him, searching for bravado or defiance. "You study war as a system that seeks equilibrium," he said. "Humans study it as a condition that breaks systems. We don't expect fairness. We don't expect survival." He gestured toward the empty projection field. "We expect loss. And we choose what we lose." Veelrix sank back into his seat, hands trembling. "You call this strength?" "No," Elias said. "We call it necessity." A faculty member spoke from the rear arc, voice carefully neutral. "Your species accepts outcomes that would psychologically devastate most Concord members." "Yes," Elias replied. "Which is why simulations fail to represent us accurately." Professor Sorenkel's voice carried a new note, something like awe, tempered by caution. "This volume of sustained trauma would destabilize entire telepathic populations." "It did destabilize us," Elias said. "We just didn't stop functioning." The chamber felt colder. Veelrix looked up at Elias, eyes stripped of contempt, bare and uncertain. "Why show us this?" he asked. "Why now?" Elias held his gaze. "Because you thought the ban meant weakness." Silence answered him. Professor Sorenkel deactivated the system. "This session is concluded." No one moved. When they finally did, it was without conversation, without mockery, without laughter. Students filed out as if leaving a memorial rather than a lecture. Veelrix remained seated until the chamber was nearly empty. When he rose, his voice was low. "Your species terrifies me." Elias didn't argue. "It should," he said. "Not because we seek destruction. But because we keep going when destruction is all that's left." Veelrix nodded once, as if accepting a truth he had no language for. As Elias exited into the silent corridor, alarms did not sound. Policies did not update. The Concorde remained intact. But something foundational had shifted. The galaxy had seen humans endure. And endurance, once witnessed, could not be unseen. The Concorde did not issue verdicts quickly. That was its pride, deliberation without haste, judgment without passion. But 3 cycles after the final ethics session, the Academy summoned Elias Mercer to the High Review Chamber, a space reserved for matters that refused to remain academic. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with inactive hololiths that bore the insignia of species older than human civilization. Faculty stood in a wide arc, their arrangement deliberate, equal, distant. No students were present. No audience. Veelrix Thuan stood among them. He looked different. Not diminished. Changed. His posture was straighter, his expression stripped of ornament. When he noticed Elias, he inclined his head, not in submission, but acknowledgement. Professor Sorenkel hovered at the chamber's center. "Cadet Mercer," they began, "your submission has concluded its review." Elias nodded once. He had learned not to anticipate relief. "The human participation ban," the professor continued, "will remain in effect." The words landed without ceremony. Veelrix exhaled sharply, as if bracing for disappointment. Elias felt none. He had not come for reversal. Professor Sorenkel raised a hand, forestalling reaction. "However, its classification will be amended." A hololith flared to life behind them, displaying Concord legal glyphs rewriting themselves in real time. Elias watched lines of policy restructure, language tightening, clarifying. The ban, the professor said, was never imposed to protect humans. A pause. The chamber leaned inward. It exists, Sorenkel continued, to protect everyone else. Silence followed, not the brittle kind, but the weighty hush of realization settling into place. A faculty member stepped forward, voice calm, ancient. Your footage demonstrated something our simulations fail to capture. Humans do not disengage when predictive models collapse. You persist beyond rational thresholds. Vielrix spoke quietly. Beyond survivability curves. Yes, Elias said. That's where we live. Professor Sorenkel's gaze rested on him. The Concord categorizes civilizations by adaptive response. Most fall within expected bands: technological escalation, diplomatic recalibration, retreat. Humanity does not. Another hololith activated, displaying a new classification header. Endurance class civilization. Vielrix's breath caught. This designation, the professor explained, is not an honorific. It is a warning. Elias studied the glyphs, feeling the strange ache of recognition. Not pride. Not triumph. Something quieter. Responsibility. A different faculty member spoke, their voice resonant with layered harmonics. Your species absorbs trauma without dissolution. You internalize loss, normalize it, and continue. Exposure to unfiltered human historical material has caused neural distress in 7 species. 3 required extended stabilization. Vielrix looked away. And yet, the faculty member continued, humans rebuild. Reorganize. Teach their offspring to stand where they fell. Elias thought of bridges repaired by hand. Of children holding flashlights steady in the dark. Professor Sorenkel addressed him directly. Cadet Mercer. Why does your species document these moments so thoroughly? Elias answered without hesitation. So we don't lie to ourselves. A murmur passed through the faculty. Vielrix turned toward Elias, eyes searching. You could have shown victories, he said. Conquests. Triumphs. Elias met his gaze. Those pass. What stays is what we survived. Another pause. Professor Sorenkel deactivated the hololiths. The ban will now be described accurately in all Concord records. Humans are not barred due to fragility. They are restricted due to psychological density. Elias inclined his head. You may continue your studies, the professor said. But access to advanced warfare simulations will remain limited. Not because you cannot endure them, but because others cannot endure you. Vielrix let out a quiet, humorless laugh. You've been sitting among us like a loaded variable. Elias considered that. So have you, he replied. You just didn't know it. The faculty dismissed the chamber. As they dispersed, Vielrix lingered. He waited until the last of the professors had exited, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. I believed morality was the absence of suffering, he said. I was wrong. Elias studied him. Morality is what you choose when suffering is unavoidable. Vielrix nodded slowly. Your species frightens us because you refuse to let pain decide who you are. That fear isn't new, Elias said. We live with it too. Vielrix hesitated, then extended a hand, not in challenge, but respect. Elias took it. The contact was brief, grounding. Outside the chamber, Caro's ring turned in its endless arc. The academy corridors felt different now, not warmer, not kinder, but more honest. Students glanced at Elias without laughter. Some looked away. Others watched with something like awe. In a quiet archive wing, the Concord updated its public index. Where once a footnote had read human participation, prohibited, a longer entry now stood. Humans possess extreme resilience under catastrophic conditions. Exposure to unfiltered human historical data may result in empathic overload. Proceed with caution. Elias paused before it, then moved on. He did not feel victorious. He felt understood, partially, imperfectly, but enough. The galaxy would not invite humans to teach warfare. It would study them from a distance, with safeguards and disclaimers. That was fine. Humans had never needed permission to endure. As Elias returned to his quarters, a message waited on his console, unmarked, internal. Thank you for not sanitizing the truth. No signature. He closed the console and looked out at the curve of the ring, at stars that had never known Earth's sky. Somewhere beyond them, humanity continued. Building, failing, standing again. The Concorde had learned something essential. Not that humans were unstoppable. But that once they started, they did not stop. And that, more than any weapon, was what the galaxy would remember. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.